Hey everyone, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. If we want to start to find our seats, figure out where we're all going to sit, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Ready?
All right, the July meeting of the Savannah Riverside Citizen Advisory CAB is now in session. I just want to say welcome. Glad to see everybody here. I hope you all enjoyed Savannah. That was where we were last, right?
I hope so. That's what my memory says.
Okay. Since we met, we've had committee meetings, and so there's, one of the things I wanted to say is, if you have not officially joined a committee, every CAB member should be an official member of at least one committee. You can attend all of them. You can join all of them. And if you want to attend all of them, they start at 4, this time at August 20th, right? And we're working on, one of the things we discussed at the last set of committee meetings was that a couple of them finished early. So it would be nice to come for all of them so that when your committee meets, if they can meet 30 minutes early, it would be nice to be able to go ahead and do that. But they have to have everybody there in order to do that. So anyway, I'll just throw that out there. And the committee chairs will speak in a minute, so you'll know who to talk to if something catches your fancy. In June, at the committee meetings, we received all kinds of updates from our DOE liaisons, and we heard progress on things like double stacking canisters, the work at the SDU tanks, the work necessary to maintain the buildings that are secured in place. One of the things that intrigued me was they've developed a spray. They have trouble with woody things growing on the outside of buildings that they've shut down. And so SRNL has developed a spray that's very effective in dealing with that. and they now use drones to inspect them to be sure that they're still intact and doing well and nothing is invading bad enough to be a problem. We also heard about, we got an update on the solar power projects that are possibly coming. I guess they are coming. I think they've signed some contracts now. And they're still working on a recommendation to set an AI program models in the D&D process. And we were given an update on True Waste. Then a couple of things. A&E committee is still looking for a co-chair unless that has happened in the last hour or so. Long-term missions, it will not meet next month. We were reminded that DHEC is split into two organizations, and so now your Department of Environmental Services, is that right? Okay, that's our side. There's another side that deals with health, right? Is that the way that works? Okay. We talked about one of the main things that we deal with, which is what's happening. How does what's happening at SRS affect the people around us? That's why we're here, to keep the citizens informed and let them know what's going on. We do have a recommendation to consider today and tomorrow regarding the transition to NNSA, who will be our new landlord. And also, not as part of that, but just as an aside, if you hadn't read it in the paper, I think that's where I saw it first. White, who was the EM1 guy, has left, and Candace Robertson has taken his place. And I gather that's not a bad thing. I mean, not a negative thing about Ike White, but that Candace is well-known and well-respected. So that's a good thing. This is Waste Management Month, right? Or Liquid Management Month. So everything we do today and tomorrow is mainly from that side of things. So at least you'll have the same terminology for 2 days in a row. Meanwhile, Candace and I are getting ready to go to the semi-annual chairs meeting in Oak Ridge in September. And so if you have anything you think needs national attention, please let us know. We do have another meeting. We'll meet with this group right before we go to the national chairs meeting. So you'll have time to think about if there's something we should be doing that you want us to do. Meanwhile, thank you for being here. The work we do is important. May sometimes be confusing, but there are always people there to help, to clarify.
Okay. It would probably make more sense if we did this first. We should reverse this on the agenda. Why don't we do board introductions, though, since we're there?
Yeah, I was going to introduce myself at the beginning, and I forgot. So
I did too.
I get it.
So how about this? I'll go, and then you go, and then we'll just go down the line and around the table.
Sounds good.
Okay. My name is James Tanner. I'm with the Department of Energy. I'm the CAB's federal coordinator, and I'm your facilitator today.
I'm Phyllis Britt. I'm the CAB chair at this point.
Candace Cave, CAB Vice Chair.
Hubert Von Tool, Chair, Long-Term Missions and Budget.
Kim Ray, Waste Management Chair.
Pat Kilroy, I'm all over the place, okay? No, really, let's see. With John and also on the plutonium side, I'm more interested in those two areas.
Okay.
Dana Scott, and I'm new to CAB.
I'm John Thomas. I'm the chair of the FDSR, Facility Disposition and Site Remediation, and year 2.
Karen Sejuan, and I'm just a member.
No one is just a member. John.
John Richards, EPA Liaison, Region 4.
Edwin DeShawn, Deputy Manager, Savannah Rivers.
I'm Amy Boyette, the Director of DOE's Office of External Affairs, and I'm the Deputy Designated Federal Official.
Susan Fulmer with the South Carolina Department of Environmental Services.
Greg O'Quinn, South Carolina Department of Environmental Services as well.
Carlos Cato, cab member. I have no clue what year I'm in. I joined originally in 2017, and then I think I had a hiatus for a while. But yeah.
We'll do that math at some point, Carlos, I promise.
Don Colson, Nuclear Materials Chair.
Sade Shofadia, Administrative and Outreach Chair.
Hi, I'm Juanita Campbell. I'm your cab administrator.
Thank you. And this is our board and folks today. All right. So before we go into agency updates, Heather, can you pull something up for me? I just wanted to make sure that we understood what we were doing, and Phyllis talked about this a little bit. We've revamped how we've been addressing cab materials over the past year. In past, we would always have a little bit from each area at every meeting. And now we're concentrating that material down. So this is the waste management, liquid waste meeting today. So everything we're going to talk about is going to have to do with these projects and programs that are managed by Savannah River Mission Completion for the department. This is the work plan topic for the Waste Management Committee. So this is what you're going to be working on and the things you're going to be focusing on. And there's two main recommendations that we were looking at. And I just wanted to remind you, you have these, they're sitting on the CAB website. I believe we put it in your email. So you should be able to reference these at some point, okay? Any questions about your work plan? A couple other things that we want to take care of before we get started. So y'all didn't know, may not have known, but Department of Energy has interns over the summer just like everybody else or lots of other folks do. Ours do a lot of hard work, and the Office of External Affairs had an intern this past summer. And her term as an intern actually ended last Friday. And nevertheless, she was so impressed with what she wanted to do and so impressed us, she came here of her own volition here on a Monday. Not as an intern anymore, but just to see you folks and see what she'd been working on over the summer. Sophie Glenn, thank you so much for your time with us. Wave to the crowd, Sophie. And then one more thing in your meeting materials that I wanted to make sure to draw your attention to first, because I want you to be thinking about this the whole time. Every single one of you has at least one application in your binder, in your folder today. It's not for you. Do not fill this out with your information and give it back to me. Everybody sitting at the table has homework. Please get this to a friend, a colleague, somebody in your neighborhood, somebody in a civic group that you feel would make a good board member. And what do we look for in good board members? Folks that are curious, want to learn about the site. Do you have to know a lot before you start? No. What do you have to be? Curious. So if you know a curious person who would like to learn more about SRS, please put this application in their hands and tell them to fill it out with all due haste. Thank you. Any questions about anything we've covered today or what we're going to cover before we get started? All right, let's roll into agency updates. Sir.
Good afternoon and welcome to North Augusta. I'm Edwin DeShawn. I'm pinch hitting for my boss, Mr. Mike Budney, who's away on travel. We're very glad to be here holding this meeting in North Augusta in this municipal facility. North Augusta has always been a great corporate partner for us and Savannah Riverside, and we're glad to have the opportunity to strengthen our relationships here today. I'll begin with the status on site programs and projects. First, the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative. Construction is well underway on the campus of the University of South Carolina, Aiken, through the end of the third quarter, FY 2024, and the project is 77% complete. AMC is on target to achieve the next major milestone, which includes the completion of the permanent enclosure, walls, roofs this calendar year. Structural steel installations was completed on November 8, 2023. Installation of interior building components along with interior and exterior walls, doors, frames, glass windows continue. The building electrical systems, ventilation, and plumbing systems are also being installed.
Right.
AMC's completion is scheduled for early summer of 2025. The Savannah River National Laboratory is progressing with the facility planning documentation for security, operations, and maintenance, which is required for occupancy and for the lab startup schedule. Landlord transition. We're continuing with our planning activities, and these things are going smoothly. Landlord transition will occur on October 1st, 2024. Operational progress and achievements. Nuclear materials. Area is continuing to receive spent nuclear fuel shipments from both domestic and foreign research reactors. At the last meeting, we mentioned that one of our foreign fuel casks fell from a trailer in L area. At that time, we were still conducting operations to lift the cask back onto the trailer and transport it into the bay for unloading. Those efforts are now complete, with the cask being safely uploaded into L Basin. There were no issues with the unloading of the fuel or any issues with the cask itself. H Canyon. H Canyon continues to make progress with the accelerated basin de-inventory, and we're scheduled to start the 7th dissolution batch for FY24 later this month. In addition, we are glad to report that all startup activities have been completed on H Canyon's 6.3 electrolytic dissolver, and the facility plans to initiate processing of the fast critical assembly material later this week. K Area. The facility continues downblending operations with 109 of the planned 120 completed through July 19th for 2024. SRS has completed 25 of the 28 shipments planned in FY24 to WIP for the K Area plutonium downblend material. Transuranic waste shipments to WIP. SRS has completed 47 shipments to WIP as of July 19th for 2024. Materials being sent to WIP continues to ship at a rate of 2 per week from the Savannah River site. Liquid waste. This fiscal year, the liquid waste program has made significant progress repairing and replacing infrastructure and process equipment to support the strong and future operations of the salt and sludge processing facilities. All facilities have been restored to service, and the program remains on track to complete the liquid waste mission by 2037. The preliminary cease waste removal for Tank 10 to complete the 2024 calendar year federal facility agreement regulatory milestone has been officially satisfied with the now received concurrence of both South Carolina Department of Environmental Services and EPA. This was accomplished 7 months ahead of the commitment date of December 31st, 2024. Activities to continue to accelerate the completion of the PCWR regulatory milestone commitments for up to 3 additional tanks as well. The liquid waste tank farms continue to have a great record for safely receiving, storing, preparing, and transferring liquid waste. There are now 18 tanks that are in various stages of design, construction, waste removal, or heel removal. This is required to support waste processing through the salt waste processing facility, the defense waste processing facility, and the end stream delivery facilities. Preparing tanks and producing salt and sludge waste batches can take up to 36 and 48 months, respectively. To avoid feed breaks, it is important to keep at least 2 batches of salt waste and 1 for sludge waste qualified and ready for processing. The next accelerated basin de-inventory transfer from the H Canyon is expected in November 2024. And preparations of additional sludge tanks to support these transfers are underway. Highlights from the salt waste processing facility include, for this fiscal year, 2.3 million gallons of salt waste has been processed through SWPF, contributing to an all-time cumulative total of 9.4 million gallons of radioactive salt waste processed since the start of SWPF hot operations. In support of the goal of faster curie work-off, SWPF is processing salt with a record high curie and sodium level with no negative impacts to the processing system. As part of the SWPF Climb to 9 initiative, longer crossflow filters have been designed in order to support the improved filtration to achieve higher salt waste processing rates. The longer filters are expected to be installed by the spring of 2025. The Defense Waste Processing Facility has produced 37 canisters of high-level vitrified waste this fiscal year and is ahead of schedule on the modifications in the glass waste storage building number 2 to allow for the double stacking of canisters. At the end stream delivery, the Saltstone production facility has stabilized over 3.3 million gallons of decontaminated salt solution by combining it with slag and fly ash to produce over 5.8 million gallons of saltstone this fiscal year. The saltstone was placed in saltstone disposal units, and also the permitted effluent treatment facility continues to treat and release excess clean water back to the environment through regulated discharge points. Construction on the final set of the saltstone disposal units 10 through 12 is progressing well. SDU 10, all columns, walls, floors, the roof section, and vertical post tensions are complete. Hydroblasting, horizontal pre-stressing, and shotcrete are underway. SDU 11 and 12, our work continues to install the mud mats and to prepare for cell construction. Under the Assistant Manager for Infrastructure and Environmental Stewardship, solar farm developer negotiations were initiated. Negotiations with Stellar Renewable Power began on Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. Stellar was selected to develop a solar farm on the property lease from DOE to support the Clean Energy Initiative. The solar farm will generate enough clean energy to allow SRS to meet the Executive Order 14057 with a goal of using 100% carbon-free energy by 2030. Negotiations are underway, and SRS hopes to have an agreement in place by the second week of August. A second solar power project with Amoresco was recently announced. Amoresco Incorporated will have the opportunity to negotiate a land lease to deploy 75 megawatts of pollution-free electricity to the grid with the potential for a battery energy storage system on at least 500 acres of the land at Savannah River. Savannah River Site ISO 14001:2015 Environmental Management System Independent Conformance Review. SRS's triennial ISO 14001:2015 ICR commenced on July 16, 2024, and was conducted through July 18, 2024. The ICR, conducted by an EM-certified external auditor, evaluated 3 major contractors' EMSs, and that's for Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, Savannah River Mission Completion, and Battelle Savannah River Alliance, to provide objective evidence for the DOE site manager to declare the site's EMS conformance with ISO 14001:2015. A declaration of conformance memorandum signed by the manager is required to be submitted to headquarters by September 30th, 2024, to comply with DOE Order 436.1A. Department Sustainability. The audit report is anticipated to be transmitted to SRS within 30 days of the July 18th exit briefing, which should be received in sufficient time to prepare and transmit the memorandum. That completes my report. Any questions?
All right. Any questions for Edwin and DOE today? Oh, come on. Really? No? All right.
Well, thank you.
You got it easy today.
All right.
Oh, never mind. Too late. Yeah, go.
Turn this thing on. Phyllis Britt Cab, I was just wondering, is any of the energy that's going to be generated from the solar program, is all of it staying on site?
That's a very good question. The quick answer to that is we're going to feed the grid, and the department will receive energy credits for what we're providing, but it won't feed the site directly.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah. And now that you say that, I remember
Yes, ma'am.
hearing that before.
Yep, no worries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Don?
Don Colson. Was an environmental impact statement generated before we approved this?
For the solar work?
Solar.
Yeah. So I can't exactly specify if EIS was done, but what I can tell you is we went through the full protocol to ensure that we have the ability to lease this land. And so I can get back to you, confirm exactly if an EIS was done, But what I can share with you is we had a long protocol of ensuring everything was anticipated and planned for.
My concern is that they considered the impact of the mining, the production, and the poor weather conditions we have here for generating solar before they made a decision to go ahead with it.
Okay, so what I'll do is introduce our SME, Jeff Hines, and he's
Toss him
probably
under the
more
bus.
accurate than I am. Thank you.
Can you hear? Oh, yeah, I guess you can. What we have done is we have constructed the lease such that it is contingent upon successful completion of an environmental baseline survey, which should be starting any day now. We were working with the Corps of Engineers to get that moving. And then also the NEPA, archaeological studies, all of those things must be successful and acceptable before we can continue into the next phase of the lease. And so essentially, no ground will be broken for probably at least 2.5, 3 years. If
Thank you.
that answer your question.
You ever tilt a salad dressing bottle a little bit too much and a whole lot comes out? Feel like we went from no questions to a lot, and that's awesome. I love to see it, unlike all that dressing that hit my salad last night. That was unfortunate. We'll go to John and then Pat. John?
John Thomas, cab. All the energy that's going out to the grid, does that cover all the energy you're pulling in for the solar vehicles? In other words, is it a net-net?
I'm not sure I can answer the question whether it balances the solar vehicles. My expectation is that it would be much more than what the solar vehicles will pull in.
good.
We're going to have a total of 150 megawatts, and that's quite a bit of power.
Good. Good, thanks.
Is that 150 megawatts maximum
Right.
capacity
That will be the solar capacity, 150 megawatts.
on a day like this?
You know, it depends on what the weather is and whether it's cloud cover, but there are models that have been developed and have been validated that say that we should be able to get something on the order of 120,000 megawatt hours out of each field every year.
Okay. Pat?
Yeah, Pat Kilroy, cab. What is the degradation rate of the film put on the solar panels over a 20-year cycle?
Panels are typically rated to have 80% after 25 years.
Yeah, we're really glad we asked you to come. At first, we were like, does he need to be here? I don't know. Well, probably, yep, the answer was yes. Candace?
Candace Cave Cab. My question is about Amoresco. Is Amoresco going to be doing solar as well? I know they use steam and things like that. So will it be solar as well? Or
They
something else?
have been offered the chance to negotiate a lease for the a second 75 megawatt facility. So they would, in fact, if we come to terms, would generate that amount of energy solar and still continue to generate about 20 megawatts with the biomass facility they have already.
Thank you.
Okay. Phyllis, did you have another one? No? Oh. Thank you. All right. Any other questions on solar or anything else we talked about? Nope. Okay. Thank you, folks. Thank you both. All right. We'll go to EPA. John?
Thank you. Again, John Richards, Region 4 EPA. And as many of you know, also my fellow project managers behind me, Brianne Martin and Jenna Dawson, they work with me. We recently, and actually we were all at the TREAT workshop, I guess 2 weeks ago, USC Aiken, where I do a similar talk there, or one of us this time I did, like I did for you at the cab in May, so explaining what EPA is, what we're doing at the site, our Superfund role, et cetera. We recently finished our latest 5-year review, which on native soil remedies. I think you may recall me mentioned before, Savannah River site's such a big Superfund site with so many past remedial projects and future, that typical Superfund site that's, maybe groundwater and a building or soil might be 2 operable units. We're well over 99 Savannah River. So instead of doing one 5-year review every 5 years, that's the norm, we have so many, we break them up into 5 categories. So this year's native soil covers, last year was operating equipment, like a pump and treat kind of thing. So that's all been gone through, and I think South Carolina's already approved it, and we're about to approve it, and then we get the official signatures that go at our division director level will come later in the fall. And we've recently had at our branch level signature a remedial action completion report, and this is in the Dumbarton Bay area around P reactor, where we did a lot of coal ash remediation in a very sensitive Caroline Bay area. A big decision document last year, and then so it's called land use controls, and there was some excavation, et cetera. But when they get a remedial action completion report, that tells our headquarters, because it's a big target for EPA headquarters, that and decision documents, that this particular remedial action is now complete. So that's a big check mark for us. And I think that's all I have for EPA, unless you have any questions.
Any questions from around the table? All right. Seeing none, we'll move on down the line. Susan, you ready?
Good afternoon. Just a few updates on some meetings and inspections that were conducted. At the end of May, there was a quarterly program meeting with SRS, and that was a programmatic meeting to discuss air, soil, and vegetation projects that are associated with both environmental monitoring programs. We have been conducting monthly inspections of the saltstone. That's been continuing. There was ambient stream sampling conducted monthly since the last CAB meeting. For the SRS NPDES permit, inspections were conducted, which consisted of discharge monitoring reports and records reviews, and 19 of 21 outfalls were visually inspected. For drinking water compliance, the A area drinking water system was sampled for trihalomethanes and halocetic acids. Those are 2 groups of disinfection byproducts, and that inspection was conducted on July 23rd. And there was also a compliance evaluation inspection of Ameresco's NPDES, and that was conducted at the end of May as well. For permits, our RECRA facility permit, the general information renewal application was determined complete on July 17th. The sanitary landfill post-closure renewal application was determined complete also on July 17th. And then the mixed waste management facility post-closure renewal application has been under review as of July 24th, and the mixed waste storage building renewal application was determined complete as of July 24th. Those are all of my updates. Any questions?
Pat.
Yeah, I did some reading earlier, and y'all test specifically for strontium-90?
Greg O'Quinn, South Carolina DES. For our monitoring program, ESOP, we do collect samples for strontium.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
James, can I add something real quick?
Absolutely.
John had mentioned the treat workshop. I just wanted to mention that we also gave a presentation on SCDES at that workshop as well. It was conducted by Madeline, right over here. So she also presented on our behalf.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Do we need to go back to anybody? We have the time, so I'm offering. Nope. Yeah? Hubert?
Yeah, I have one question.
Oh, we'll go to, yeah.
This is about the solar panels. Where are the solar panels being built?
We have placed in the request for qualifications a statement that we would prefer that the developers buy American solar panels. However, the facility will not be a government facility. It will not be built or owned or operated by the government. And so because of that, we are not able to require that it be, that the Buy American Act would be enforced.
You do realize that most of the solar panels used in the world are made in China.
Actually, quite a few are made in Georgia, in Cartersville and up near Dalton. There's a company, it's called Q-Cells, that makes many.
I'm aware, but
Yeah.
compared to what China is making, and I
Sure.
think Germany is second
Yep.
in the production of solar panels.
Yeah.
And what is your contingency plan if we don't import or something happens between us and China in the meantime? Because everything breaks.
Sure. Our contingency plan is that is the developer's problem. We're doing a land lease that allows them to come in and build the facility. And if they have supply chain issues, then they will have to address that.
Thank you.
Okay. Hubert?
Hubert Von Tool, Cab. This is really for any and all of the environmental specialists. I was just wondering if you had anything to say about your interaction with the NNSA, if you've had such interaction.
This is EPA Region 4. I also work at Oak Ridge facility over many projects, including the Y12 facility. Y12 may be unique in the DOE complex, has always been part NNSA, part EM, which would be quite different than what Savannah River plan to do, which is completely switching over. So at least Region 4 has had many interactions with NNSA, at least the Oak Ridge facility.
And
Greg O'Quinn, SCDES. So we do have some interaction with the NNSA folks for some of our monitoring. Excuse me. So ESOP is actually on the EM side, associated with them, but we do have a staff member that is doing some work associated with the NNSA facility, specifically SR PPF. And so we are doing some environmental monitoring around that facility. That's kind of separate from our other monitoring group.
Okay. Anything else, folks? Okay. Seeing none, let's move on down our agenda. We'll slide into committee updates, and we'll get some input on what's been happening since the last committee meetings. John, facilities disposition and site remediation, if you have an update for everybody.
John Thomas, Cab. The committee is in place. I've got Carolyn as my co-chair, and 2 members have volunteered, Pat being one of them. And we had our presentation last meeting 2 months ago, which was focused on us. We just need to review all those presentations and see if we've got any efficiencies and anything we can do to enhance the process.
Okay.
But that's the update.
Any facilities disposition and site remediation. If you've got a copy of the agenda, it's right there under committee updates. Nuclear materials, Don.
We have no updates.
Okay. Kim with Waste Management.
Thank you. We did meet last month when we had our committee meetings. We have a couple new committee meetings, committee members, Janie Scott and Kevin DeLagle. I have looked back at the work plan and looked at the recommendations, which you were kind enough to put up on the board earlier today, which include reviewing the liquid waste system plan and making some suggestions for easier comprehension and consumption by the public. So we will plan on doing that at our committee meeting next month. And we've got copies of these, and if my committee members don't have them, you've promised me that they will receive copies of these so they can take a look at them by next month. So that's our plan right now, is to take a look at that for next month and have a report on that, recommendation on that.
Pat, did I see your card go up? Did I see your card go up, sir?
Yeah, well, I've got about 12 questions. When you want to pick appropriate time.
Are they about the Waste Management Subcommittee? Or are they about, they are?
About John, yes.
Oh, about John's committee?
Yes.
Okay, hang on to that. Let's get through this, and then we'll do those, and then we'll probably take a break, okay?
Okay.
Long-term decision budget.
We did meet last month, and I'll spare you my deathless prose until it's time to discuss the recommendation.
Thank you, Mayor. And then A&O. Shawty, do you have any updates for the board?
Hello, everyone. I'm looking for a vice chair as well as committee members. I believe that you all are automatically committee members. Is that correct? Or-
No, they do have to join, but you can ask them to
Okay,
join.
well, you guys please join. I've highlighted some events throughout all the areas along the Savannah River site where we can engage, network, do outreach to recruit more CAB members. Right, and we have a meeting today at 4:30, so please join.
Okay. Okay. I promised you some time, Pat.
You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, first of all, last month, it was brought to my attention that on the several of the canyons, there was vegetation growing on it. And some of it was identified as pine trees. And I'm a little gardener and I do stuff. I got cracks in my driveway at home. Seems like everybody gets those, but grass always comes up in it because there's water, there's soil, and it happens. And I started thinking about the canyon. So we got the P, R, and C are shut down and filled, correct?
Those are reactor buildings.
Yeah,
And just
reactor.
P and R. C has another life as rad training facility, right? Yeah. So it is not a closed facility, but P and R are closed as reactor buildings.
Okay, because I read it on somewhere. I got into this. I really did since the last meeting. But it said that the C reactor, that the floor was sealed. I assume it was grouted. I assume we talk about these swimming pools where all the nuclear material was put into, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But P&R, when they first told me that these were sealed and no longer in use, I assume they were filled to the top, right? Is it just the floor level sealed? Okay. So,
We're gonna phone a friend on that because I bet Angela was there and she knows.
Hello, Angela Adams.
Okay.
And so for P&R, they were filled with grout, the subfloors, and all the way up through where the reactors actually had the actuators.
Okay, so,
And-
but there's still a void in this building?
Yes.
Okay. And this was the thing I started thinking about, though. If you've got vegetation growing on the roofs, then there's got to be dirt up there. And for the vegetation to grow, and these are flat roofs, correct?
No, they're not.
They're sloped?
They're sloped. During
Okay.
the deactivation and decommissioning process, they're engineered roofs with slopes such that water cannot stay there. However, we're in the South, so we have had vegetation on both of the roofs, and that's what we've used drones to go up and put pesticides there.
Okay. So if the vegetation is growing there still has to be some divots, has to be some cracks, there has to be something, a soil to get into. Because you could take pine seeds, and I can put them on a silver platter, and they will never sprout. But they gotta have water, and they've got to have some organic material.
I think they have the organic material. I do not believe there are cracks. We send drones up to do the inspections, also on the roofs, and if we see any vegetation, then we will send the drones back up to do the vegetation. I'm not sure that we've had a pine tree growing. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what I thought I heard.
Avery Hammett, CAP, DOE.
Yeah.
Not CAP. Sorry. So this is like when in the valley of your roof, you get pine straw accumulating or leaves, and then it starts to kind of break down, and seeds blow in, and you get little sprouts.
Because
I think the pine trees came from when I said that I have pine trees growing out of my personal gutters.
Okay.
And I equated that to the growth on the roof. So that's what it is. They're not growing in cracks. It's just where the debris is kind of blown up into the corners, and it accumulates enough. It accumulates enough organic material that seeds can blow in, or birds can drop seeds that will sprout. But the pine trees came from my own house. So.
Well, how many years? All right, y'all essentially said that the building's complete and sealed, correct? And it's supposed to last, what, 10,000 years? Anybody got a number?
A lot of.
1,000?
And it's at least 1,000 years.
At least 1,000?
Mm-hmm.
All right, what is the roof material made of?
Concrete, reinforced steel is up there, so we can get you that information. I don't have that available.
All right. No, two things. I've really studied too much on concrete and everything. But I was looking at this, and also the composition of the grout. I'd like to know what that is. Here's the thing. And I got an education on concrete, which I really didn't want. But most concrete we make, which is made out of Portland cement, is the base of it. And they're saying, oh, Portland cement's got a 50 to 100 years lifespan. And why? Because it cracks. Eventually, it'll decay over time. And then you say, has anything ever lasted? Yeah. The Pantheon in Rome has a concrete roof, but it was made out of Roman concrete. And the big difference, they just discovered this last year in 23. MIT did some analysis on the Roman concrete. But what it was made out of, instead of calcium hydroxide, they used hot concrete, made it out of calcium oxide. And the other thing is they had little pieces of calcium oxide all through it, plus they used pumice and volcanic ash, to make this stuff. But that roof on the Pantheon, the last time it did crack in 1925, but you're talking 143 AD when it was built. I mean, that's the last time it was worked on. That's 2,000 years. And the thing I'm getting at, what I'm looking at, is that there should be, if we're going to build these monuments up there to last forever, we're going to all be dead in a few years, guarantee you, all right? But the next generation, or the generation after us, or the generation that comes after that, this thing should be a monolith that doesn't affect anybody. If we're still here, we're still, still people on Earth. And I believe there needs to be more work on these roofs. Because here's the deal. Is there any water on the inside of the floor of these buildings, as much as the concrete is? Is there any way to detect if there's any moisture getting on the concrete, the grout?
We have monitoring and detectors inside the building, on the outside of the building, so we can get you more information on that. We had SRNL help us to formulate the grouts that were used inside the facility for such things as water coming into the facility. So we can get you as much information as you like on the composition of the roof and the grout mixtures that were used.
Do y'all have cross-sectional drawings of the roof, how it was built?
Yes.
I'd like to see that too.
Okay.
The thing is, if you're gonna build this thing and it's gonna last for eons, then it's gotta be built. There's gotta be places where straw or whatever, anything organic cannot collect on the top of it.
So why don't we plan for addressing these maybe in a future presentation? We can try to cover that. We can talk about, long-term deactivation and decommissioning and how that's handled and modeled out. And we can try to get you a lot of that information. We can talk specifically about the reactor buildings. We try to make sure that we have people here to answer questions. That's a detail that we didn't think we were going to get to today. But we're more than happy to address it. I'm sure that we can talk to all that stuff.
And may I suggest maybe at the FDSR committee meeting that we could do it
If you'd like to do it then?
Okay. So we'll have people in place that will be able to answer your questions, show you the drawings that we have. There are tons of drawings
I'm sure there are.
that we have to give more information on that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, folks? Going once, going twice around the table? Okay, let's do this. I know it's a little bit early, but we've got a little bit more business to take care of today. Let's go ahead and take 10, get ourselves settled, and then we'll settle in for the rest of the afternoon, okay? Be back at 2 o'clock. Yeah. I've got 2 o'clock. Let's start to find our seats. Wrap up our conversations. Find a chair to be in. A wall to lean against. And we'll get started momentarily. Candace, you cannot yell into the microphones. I'm sorry, no. All right, a couple of notes, even though we don't have everybody back yet. We're going to do this in order to help spend a little time. So just a reminder, this presentation will be the kickoff for what we'll all see tomorrow. This is about the liquid waste system at Savannah River site, taking care of the waste in the tanks. I'm sure and I hope that you'll have lots of questions and comments as we go along. Do me a favor, please remember to bring the microphone physically in front of you and speak clearly into it. Not just so that those of us in the room can hear you. I'm sure that if we turned off the mics, we could shout loud enough to hear each other. But we have folks online who are trying to watch and pay attention. We want to be respectful to them and their ability to watch what we're doing. And we also need to capture the comments clearly for our meeting minutes. I want a clean record of what we're doing here today. And so if you could do me a favor, please remember to pick up the microphones, bring it close in front of you and speak directly into them. If you move, the mic needs to move too. Make sure it travels with you, okay? Any questions before we get started? All right. Joel and Mike, are y'all ready? Let's hit it, gentlemen.
DWPF. That's the Defense Waste Processing Facility. And they're going to talk about the optimizations that are supporting the mission. That's going to be handled by Doug Baumgartner and Brittany Califf. After that, SWPF, which is the Salt Waste Processing Facility, and the optimizations that are taking place there. That's going to be handled by Jason McIntyre as well as Steve Howell. In-stream delivery and those optimizations will be presented by Mr. Rodney Blackman. The laboratory and its support for increased salt and sludge batches is going to be handled by Melissa Santella Ramos. And lastly, the SDU updates, that's going to be handled by Brandon Witt and Miss Clarissa Cool. At the bottom here, you're going to see some pictures of some of the facilities that are part of the liquid waste system. First is the Defense Waste Processing Facility, where, of course, we send waste to be glassified. The Salt Waste Processing Facility, which actually separates waste streams for us and sends our higher level waste off to DWPF. And the Saltstone Production Facility and the SDUs. Those are large tanks where our low level waste is sent for permanent isolation. So inside our tanks, our system, or all the tanks at SRS, contains 33.4 million gallons of waste. If you look at the left side there, you will see that it's broken up into different numbers. And in the middle, you'll see how it says the composition of the tank being salt supernatant, salt cake, and sludge. So that first volume, you will see the largest components that we deal with are salt supernatant and salt cake. The lowest being sludge, approximately 9% of the volume that we're dealing with. Looking at the salt cake and the supernatant, that layer is composed of approximately 34.7 million gallons and a 15.9. Moving over to the number of curies, things change. The higher volume actually has a lower curie count, with sludge being the lowest volume and having 106 million curies. Sludge itself, if you keep going over to the left, has a consistency of peanut butter. That is a substance that is pretty hard to deal with on the site, but we do manage it, and that's sent directly to DWPF. Salt supernatant is more of pancake syrup type consistency. And lastly is the table salt sort of precipitants that we deal with, we call salt cake. So salt cake is that middle layer. We do have to take steps to wash that down, dissolve it, and send it off. At the bottom, you're going to see 4 different tanks that we have. The first ones are tanks 1, 2, and 4 I'll talk about. Tanks 1, 2, and 4. These are the single shell, or as we like to call them, old style tanks. There's 18 of those tanks that are in the process of being closed or planned to be closed. Type 3 tanks are newer style tanks. Those are tanks that are double shelled. We do have 51 tanks enclosed total at the site, 8 of which have been closed and 43 are remaining for closure. At this point, I will show you a video that will give you more information about our site. Not sure if that's working. Okay. All right, so I'll keep moving. We'll go to the next slide. Oh, there it is.
What is radioactive liquid waste? How do we safely treat it and provide permanent disposal? The Savannah River site
left here, Mike.
It's a different laptop. I don't know where.
The Savannah River site has been the source for unit lines that are recovered from reactor fuel and target rods by a
We'll move on. Sorry about that, everyone. So essentially what you're looking at right here in the presentation is what I was going to give you in the video. So as an explanation, H Canyon, that's where our process starts. H Canyon sends material, that dissolved spent nuclear fuel, off to our tank farm, which is, you'll see on the left there, H&F tank farm. It's held eventually to go off to our salt waste processing facility. And again, it goes to our effluent treatment plant. The salt waste processing facility takes that waste and separates streams. The higher level cesium waste, the salt that we deal with, ultimately will go to DWPF. At DWPF, it's mixed in with frit, where it's turned into glass and it's stored on a temporary basis until we find a facility that we can house it at permanently. That little truck you see is the SCT, and you saw that in an earlier video. From SWPF, we send waste off to the saltstone production facility, where again it's processed and sent out into the SDUs. At the SDUs, it is permanently fixed. That is low-level waste that we will manage forever. That will sit there, and we will cover that ultimately in the future. Back over to the left, you'll see the effluent treatment plant. That plant actually takes our waste and processes it, sends a clean stream of water back to the environment, and any waste products are sent back to either SWPF, our tank farms, or perhaps off to DWPF directly through a series of transfer lines. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Mike.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. Let's back up one. So I wanted to start with this slide to explain our concept of the power of as one. When SRMC came on board and the department hired us about 2 years ago, we came up with this slogan with our own team because we were blending what was the old liquid waste contract with the SWPF facility, which was under a separate contract to build it and to start it up for the first year of operations. And we wanted to promote the concept of teamwork, that it takes all of us together working as one to be successful. So we were realigning our corporate values at that time. There was a lot of effort external with our partners with South Carolina Department of Environmental Services and EPA as well to try to bring us all together with a common vision and goals with where we thought the program would best head to be successful for ultimately finishing the liquid waste mission. So it started internal, but I really wanted to expand on that, as you can see in this slide, to say that the power is one. We see partnering is something that we do across with our client, with the Department of Energy, with our stakeholders, that includes yourselves, obviously our regulators that I already mentioned, and we will succeed or fail together. And so that is part of the message of bringing us together, because we are going to succeed, and to do that together as one team, because we all have one purpose, which is that we want to accelerate the environmental cleanup of the liquid waste mission and bring it to closure. We've been contracted by the Department of Energy to do that with very aggressive goals that they've given us. And one of those goals is to finish this mission by 2037. And we're on track to do that. We're off to a good start, working through some of the initial issues as we bring the plants up to full production. But we're working to get that done. So for the discussion you're going to hear today from us, and also with our teammates, several which are in the room in the back, they'll be speaking to you tomorrow, is it really aligns to our company core values. And you can see those on the right that match up with our company logo, SRMC, but safety, reliability, mutual respect, and continuous improvement. So the discussions you're going to hear over the next day and a half, you'll see how that they align to that, and I'll give you a little bit of a preview. Relative to safety, we see very much, you'll hear discussions on reducing risk. You'll hear a lot of that today. You'll hear a little bit of that tomorrow. Two big elements with that, which is high curie processing and also accelerating removal of waste and closure of tanks in the water table or near the water table. The R, or reliability, is related to our plant reliability. You'll hear tomorrow in depth from Steve, who's in the back with SWPF, and from Rodney, who's got the Saltstone facility, and from Doug, who's going to talk defense waste processing. A lot of the efforts they're doing is to make their plants reliable. Why that is important to us is if the plants are reliable, just think of your cars, if they're reliable, they will be on the road more. They'll continue to run more, they'll operate more. And so you'll hear a lot today and tomorrow about our Climb to 9 optimizations. Those are focused around two main things: availability of the plants, and that's the reliability so that the plants are always available to run. And the other part is the throughput, how fast they're processing material through those plants. So we'll talk today and tomorrow about that. The M for mutual respect is to our client and our stakeholders. We believe as a company that we need to deliver our commitments to our client stakeholders either on schedule or ahead of schedule. So you'll hear us talk about the FFA milestones that's part of that. And then Brandon tomorrow is going to talk about the saltstone disposal units, which are our big capital projects, and what we're doing to deliver those on and ahead of schedule. And then the last piece, or the C, is continuous improvement, which goes back to the optimizations again, related to throughput and availability. So you'll hear a lot of discussion on that. And then Melissa's in the back as well, and she'll be talking about our laboratories, what their role is to try to optimize tomorrow so that they can support this accelerated salt and sludge processing. So I kind of wanted to recap, once again, back to the partnering with EPA and South Carolina Department of Environmental Services. We got together as a group 2.5 years ago, roughly, and we said, let's talk about what our goals are for the mission. And we established jointly these goals, and I'll just summarize them here. All of them are around reducing risk, and reducing risk is geared around finishing the mission, processing the material. So the first goal, and these are in priority order as we agreed to, is that we want to reduce the risk by removing waste and closed tanks with a goal to complete the program by 2037. And so we're focused on that, to do it as fast as we can, and we've laid out models that we believe that we can achieve by 2037. The second one is that we are geared around aggressively removing curies from the waste tank. When we came on board 2.5 years ago, working with the department, we shifted the strategy so that we would start trying to load more curies in the front end batches that we process. And I'll talk a little bit more on that in a second and why that's important to us. The third thing is we said we're going to optimize our operations so that we can, in essence, minimize the life cycle of the liquid waste system, try to shorten it as much as possible. And that third one ultimately supports the first one of finishing the mission by 2037. And then the last one we said is we want to complete our waste removal and the subsequent grouting of the tanks and these ancillary structures in the tank farms on a risk-based order. First to tanks that are in or near the water table, followed by the F tank farm tanks with a priority focus on the old style tanks first that have FFA milestones on each tank, followed by the remainder of the waste tanks, and then last the ancillary structures, which are like diversion boxes, transfer pits, old systems that are out of service. And once again, that sequence was geared based on what we perceive as trying to maximize risk reduction on the front end of the mission to get done. The table on the right is the schedule for the remaining old style tanks, and those are by calendar year, both for preliminary ceased waste removal and ultimately for operational closure. You can see we have one PCWR that's required in calendar year 24. That one's already done, as was mentioned earlier by Edwin. And then we have 3 in 25, and you can see the rest of the numbers for the 16 old style tanks. So starting with this, delivering our commitments to our client stakeholders, and this supports that FFA goal number 2 I just mentioned, which is to aggressively remove curies from the waste tanks. So when SRMC came on board working with the Department of Energy, we took a shift in focus to look at how we were formulating the front end salt batches that we were going to feed SWPF. And we changed our approach to say we wanted to get the tanks that had higher curie material processed first, and that takes us out through batch 22. And when you look at our SWPF feed batches, and there's roughly nominally about 100 batches over the life of the missions, but through the first 22 would be the high curie batches, and we have focused batching those tanks up to load the curies up. And you can see the results of it. If you look at the previous 8 years before SRMC took over in February of 22, you can see that we processed about 16.8 million curies, And in the last 2 years, roughly, we've processed the same million curies, roughly 16.7. And this is a direct function. One, it helps that as production's starting to come up, but the bigger thing that achieved that is us loading the curies of the batches much higher than we had done historically. And you can see the system curie content is down in the low 200s from when we started, that it was close to 230, as you can see on the graph. You can even see just by the slope of the graph the drastic change in a short period of time. So related to that, I wanted to use this illustration, which I've used before, to think about just something that's common to all of us, driving our car, and think about an economical car. We can put 10 gallons of gas in a big SUV, and you can put 10 gallons of gas in a small economy car that gets good gas mileage, and that small car is going to go a lot further. And the whole concept here, and as you can see by this graph, prior to the inflection point that you see circled, which is just prior to July of 23, the curies, which is the green line, and the gallons, which is the blue line, during that first period there, we're tracking about the same. For every gallon that's processed, about the same amount of curies is going out of the system. Prior to this graph, if you go back further, they were further apart, as in you had to, because we were processing prior to this graph even starting on the screen, we were doing about a half a curie a gallon. So you're having to do 2 gallons to get an equivalent curies prior to that. If you look at the inflection point when we upped our batches to around 3 to 4x curies per gallon from what they were prior, you can now see that the curies are diverging from the gallons and continuing to diverge more and more as we continue to process. And that is a direct reflection of the curies per gallon going up 3 to 4x per batch. And that will continue through about May of 26, when we'll finish the last of the high curie batches, which is batch 22 currently. And if you look at the batches that we've made up to date to process through SWPF, the ones that are either been processed through Steve's facility in SWPF or the ones that are made up in the tank farm waiting to go to SWPF, we've already made up 47% of those batches. So we're almost halfway done, if you will, in making up the batches to achieve this objective. So we just talked about the efforts to maximize the risk reduction through curies and accelerating that. Now I want to talk about some of the efforts, and this goes back to the FFA goal number 3, to optimize our operations and what the benefit is for us to maximize waste removal. By us maximizing waste removal, we shorten the life cycle, but it also helps us to get the waste out of the tanks that leads ultimately to meeting PCWR milestones for preliminary cease waste removal, and then ultimately operational closure of tanks. They go hand in hand. And we've used this graphic pretty much for about the last 2 years to try to demonstrate our focus on the optimizations that we feel are needed, particularly in salt waste processing and defense waste processing. The top of the graph is SWPF, the bottom below the line is DWPF. And this graph walks you through what we've done to date, and this graph was through the end of June. But everything to the left of the line has been implemented either in SWPF or DWPF, and then what's to the right of the line is what we still have in front of us. And what we've achieved with these various optimizations in both of the plants is, but once again, they've been either focused on reliability, which leads to plant availability, how much it's available to operate, or they're focused on throughput, how fast it goes through the plant. So there's a suite on both sides. We're not going to cover them all, but the couple of themes here is if you look at the line, you can see the first year of SWPF operations is down on the bottom left. We were running at a 2 million gallon per year rate in SWPF. We did 2 million gallons that year. We have demonstrated through what's been done to date, you can see us ascend to rates up to just north of 5 million gallon rate that we're able to show that we can sustain in SWPF, and we're headed towards up to 9 million with what's in front of us. And so those are important. A lot of times people will look at this and they'll pick one out and go, well, did that get you 0.2 more gallons or something through SWPF? And so I use this graphic on the left here to try to give an illustration of how this all works. If you think about like a pipe in your home, whether it's a sink drain that's plugged, you'll have limited flow based on the biggest obstruction in that pipe. But once you clear that out, your flow will then be limited by the next obstruction or the next one. So to get the pipe at full flow, you got to basically get the whole thing cleaned out. In other words, you got to address everything that is restricting you from where you want to go relative to draining your pipe. And the same thing is true for our plants. We have to address everything. So some of the things that are being implemented in the plants, really, you don't see the immediate benefit today, but to get to 9 million, you'll see that. And I'm going to give you an example of one of those. In Rodney's plant, Rodney's in the back of the room, who'll be talking to you tomorrow about saltstone. Saltstone has not been challenging our ability to produce at any level so far. As a matter of fact, they've been doing a wonderful job. Lots of good mods have been done over the last decade that have set that plant up for success. However, to get to 9 million, one of the things that we know is going to be a limiting point for us is being able to transfer the decontaminated salt solution from Steve's plant at SWPF to Rodney's plant in Saltstone. And right now, we transfer that to the tank farm through a pipe, and then it turns right around later on and goes back to the same transfer header, if you think of it that way, back to Saltstone. It works now because at the rates we're running, there's no problem coordinating transfers in that line. When we're at 9 million, it will not work, and the team already knows that, and the team has already fixed that we're able to direct transfer from SWPF to Saltstone. That's an example of, even though it's not limiting us today, the team's already working on lots of things that'll help us get to where we're trying to go. So a couple things just to mention further on this graph. I wanted to talk about throughput. If you look at the SWPF part of the line, throughput has been the biggest limiting thing that we've been dealing with, primarily the filters that are on the front end of the process, the cross-flow filters. So we have done, and I'm not going to go through it, but there's probably 10 or so things on the top of this line that have been attacking that problem, and we've been making some improvements from where we started. We were filtering with 3 filters online, probably at around 12 GPM total with 3 running. We've worked our way up north of 16, even showing demonstrator runs of 18 GPM with those 3 filters running, but not where it needs to go. The design basis of the plant is 2 filters basically can run at around 22 GPM, about 11 GPM a filter. So we're not where we need to go. All of the optimizations we did has brought us to a conclusion that those filters need to be redesigned to give us greater capacity. So in the spring outage that was mentioned earlier, we're going to go to 200% capacity for filtration compared to where we are today, doubling what we can do today. That change is a big change that will get us ultimately where we need to go, on top of a lot of the changes that have been done all the way that have already increased our flow through the filters. And we'll keep doing those. We've done things with hygiene of the filters. We've done stuff that we know, some adjustments that we can do to the feed to those filters that also improves. So the combination of all that by the spring of 25 will get us throughput that we need for SWPF. If you turn to the DWPF side of the line, just to give you an example, the restriction that we deal with there is the sludge receipt and adjustment tank has to take the effluent streams that come off of salt waste processing facility. They're predominantly 2, MST sludge solids and strip effluent, and that sludge receipt and adjustment tank in DWPF can be a choke point because it can't run fast enough and keep up, and if they have equipment problems, it can all of a sudden shut SWPF down. So there have been a lot of improvements on the bottom half of the line to go after that to improve the availability of defense waste processing facility so that it will not shut down salt waste processing facility. And so the way that that's done is we're done, for example, if you look at the combination of things that have been done, they've reduced the SRAT processing cycle time by about 25% in the last 2 years, which is about a 40-hour reduction in that cycle. That means those batches can turn around faster. So if they now have an equipment problem, they have time to fix it and then still catch back up and not limit SWPF. So I gave you one series of examples in SWPF on throughput, and I gave you one example for DWPF with availability. All of it gets to this big spring outage out here, which is in the April timeframe, where the last set, I'll call them, some of the major mods are going to be done. The filters I already mentioned. We're going to do upgrades with the main process cell crane for DWPF, and Doug will talk more about that tomorrow. We're also going to make the capacity that choking strip effluent stream I mentioned can be diverted to a second vessel, so we can speed up processing that as well. And so there are several other ones that you'll hear more about tomorrow that's geared around that to help us get to where we need to go. Okay? So as I was mentioning on that last graph, availability, think throughput. You'll see we often use the gears to describe the liquid waste system on the left side. If you'll notice, defense waste processing and salt waste processing, which I spent a lot of time talking about on the last slide, are color-coded red. That is where we're most closely coupled and where a lot of our improvements are geared towards to try to improve the system. The rest of the facilities, like Saltstone that I mentioned, the tank farms, whether it's prepping sludge or salt, the evaporators and the effluent treatment facility that Joel was talking about earlier, none of those to date, the ones that are in green, have ever limited our processing for salt waste processing or DWPF. And our goal is to keep it that way. So even though I spent a lot of time, and you've seen the Climb to 9, which focuses on those 2 plants, they're the red gears here, there are optimizations going all around liquid waste, and I gave you the one example for direct transfers that affect Saltstone, all over the liquid waste system. So the other piece that I wanted to mention, just kind of driving home why availability is important, and I'm using the car again because it's the easiest thing to think about. If you think about a car that's traveling 100 miles in a 10-hour window, if your car goes 100 miles per hour, you can get there in 1 hour and it can park for the other 9 hours. You don't need much availability because that car can cover a lot of ground fast. If the car only drives 10 miles per hour, you have to have 100% availability. It's got to be driving the whole time for those 10 hours or you won't get there. In other words, so you see, it's a simple concept that we're all used to in things that we deal with. We deal with the same thing in our world. This graph here on the right shows the processing rates that we've been achieving. It's hard to see on the video here, but it also shows that where we were at the end of probably around the beginning of July, and since that time, we're up over 9.4, as Edwin mentioned earlier, for total salt processed through SWPF since startup. Okay. So I did want to give you just a brief update on waste retrieval and tank closure. Just to give you a ballpark to feed salt and sludge to the plants as I've been describing, you have to be working on a lot of fronts to get tanks ready to do waste removal so that you can empty those tanks, but also so you can make up salt and sludge batches to feed SWPF and Defense Waste Processing Facility. So you can see right now in our FY24 scope, we're working about 14 tanks in the field. We have about 3 tanks working in design, and these are mods being done to the tanks to get ready for supporting the plants. In addition to that, some of the tanks that are already modified are actively undergoing waste removal activities. So you can see the volume of tanks that are being dealt with. And if you look, it's hard to see here. If there's a laser, maybe I can point it out. Let's see if I don't turn it off. These tanks right here are the ones that we talk about being in or near the water table in H tank farm. You can see a lot of arrows pointing into there, and we're doing work there. We said that's our #1 priority where we're working, and you can see that, and 2 of those tanks currently are already grouted. And if you look, we said our second priority was the F tank farm tanks, which are over here, and you can see a lot of arrows in that direction as well, which is our second priority, going back to our integrated priority list that EPA and South Carolina Department of Environmental Service and us agreed to focus on. So part of the reason for working on so many tanks is it takes us roughly about probably 2.5 years to do design and installation of mods that support getting the waste out. And it takes us nominally about 1.5 years to get all the waste, bulk waste and hill removal out of a tank. And that's on average, because not every tank's the same. Some have more waste, some have less. But that gives you a rough feel. You're talking about a 4-year journey to get from start to getting the tank empty, and why we work on so many to get ready to feed the facilities. So to delivering our commitments to our client stakeholders, which supports the FFA goal #4, which is the tanks that we're working on in risk-based sequence, these are the tanks that we started on the contract that are in or near the water table, tanks 9, 10, 11, and 15. So we did an aggressive campaign to pull those back. You'll see some of that on a subsequent slide. You'll see one of them is already done. That's tank 10. We declared preliminary cease waste removal earlier this year. And then you can see per the graph right now that tank 9 is still tracking to finish in this fiscal year. It's getting very close to being done. And 11 and 15, you can see they trail into FY25. So if you go back to the FFA table, get 1 in calendar year 24 and 3 in calendar year 25, these would be the 4 that we're kind of targeting for that, but we have others I'm going to talk about in a minute that we're accelerating. Okay? So these are, once again, priority. That was water table tanks. Now I'm talking F tank farm tanks. And you can see the original schedule up here is our baseline. Up here, this series of tanks from 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, and 8, that was the baseline that we laid in when we got our contract established. What we are currently driving to is what's possible down below, the same schedules as the ones above, and you can see several of those have been accelerated by the gaps between the green and the salmon color. And just so you know what you're looking at, The blue items that are on here are the mods that are done and the evolutions that take place to do bulk waste removal. The green logic is on the applicable tanks, the heel removal mods and heel removal activities. And the salmon color to the right is the operational closure activities. So you can see while the operational closure salmon colored activities have not changed both in our baseline and today's projection, you can see that the bulk waste removal, and particularly the heel removals, we're creating now a lot of gap in between, which shows the acceleration by the focus on those tanks and F-tank foam. So this represents all 16 of the FFA milestone tanks for preliminary cease waste removal. And what I just wanted to highlight here is if you take a look, the gray tanks, one for each tank as they go right across 10, 15, 9. The gray ones is what we have in the FFA table that you just saw, what we agreed to as far as the commitment dates, what calendar years they have to be done. The dark blue tanks, like you can see 24 right here, is what we laid in our baseline. The light blue tanks, where you see the same numbers, is where we're currently tracking to. And you can see for most part, all of the tanks are either on schedule, slightly ahead of schedule, or way ahead of schedule. And then the ones kind of the orangish reddish color is before we implemented the risk reduction strategy, and I wanted to highlight 3 of the tanks. Tanks 9, 10, 11, we had a process in place at the time, for those that may have followed us historically, called the TICKR process, which was an ion exchange tank side cesium removal process. And so you can see that when we established the contract, where those were projected, and now how many years ahead, by basically pausing TICKR and putting those as the first priority for feeding SWPF, has accelerated those 3 tanks. So now I wanted to give you a couple of show and tell pictures to give you a feel. So this is tank 10, the one that we did declare preliminary cease waste removal on earlier this year. And if you look on the pictures on the left, you got a couple of pictures of the tank 10 inventory before we did all the waste removal activities I've been mentioning. And you can see you have both solid white salt, like Joel was discussing earlier as one of our waste forms. You had some liquid supernate salt material that was in there. And then after we're done with the waste removal in tank 10, these are the pictures of what tank 10 looked like. And you can see even with a small amount of residual water in the tank, you can see down through it to the tank bottom. You can see some of these. These are cooling coils with all the piping, and you can see all the way to the bottom and see how clean it is. So a highly successful campaign getting PCWR done on tank 10. And then here's the annulus. In addition to cleaning the inside of the tanks out, we also clean the annulus on tanks that have some material that has built up in the annulus, and tank 10 was one of those tanks. And if you look in this case, just to confuse you, the before and afters are horizontal versus vertical. So the before pictures are the ones above this line, and the after pictures are below that. So here's one shot through the east riser and one through the west. And what I want you to pay attention to is if you look in the very bottom down here, there's a ventilation duct where you can see it's filled with salt. See the white at the kind of a register location, and there's salt laying in the trough left and right of that. And then if you look here, exact same location and picture, you can see the troughs are empty and clean, as well as inside the ductwork is completely clean. So the annulus was cleaned. Same thing here, you can see some before pictures, and then in the same location, if you look down in the bottom, that it's clean. You will notice in both of these pictures, you've got some salt residue from some of the leaks, very minor amounts that stays on the wall. That's all part of the PA that's been analyzed. Small volumes that is left on the wall, but the large volume in the bottom has been cleaned out. So I know that was a fair amount of material, but really I just wanted to summarize, and this sets the stage for my teammates tomorrow when they further expound in all of these areas. The summary is that we're processing higher curie batches at SWPF, and that continues to accelerate risk reduction in the mission. We've had good progress. You can see almost about half those batches have been compiled. Many of those have been processed, and we're on our way to, by spring of 26, to being done with those. We're accelerating waste removal from tanks in the water table, as you saw I described in the 9 through 16 tanks, because that also accelerates risk reduction. We're maximizing our waste removal and optimizing that so that we can accelerate tank closures and accelerate risk reduction. And ultimately, we're delivering our commitments to our client stakeholders, either on or ahead of schedule. So with that, It's going to open it up for questions for Joel and myself.
All right, well, Phyllis, your card is up first. We'll just start there. Oh, was it? I'm sorry, I missed it.
Can I make a statement first? We have no
absolutely.
solar panels. I wanted to make sure that was clear. and other than that, go ahead.
We'll start with Sade. That's fine.
Hello, Shadi Shokadia, SRS Cab. I'm curious, well, one, congratulations on being ahead of schedule.
Thank you.
And I also really like and appreciate the analogies, the vehicles that you added onto the slides. I look forward to seeing more of that.
Okay.
I'm curious about what were the changes that increased the query processing you guys did more recently than what you did, I guess, in the past 8 years.
Yeah, so probably the biggest thing, filtration at SWPF was most limiting. Steve's team has done a very good job of implementing about 10 or so items. They've been a big one that helped was the cleaning rhythm that we're in for the filters. We have 3 filters. They're supposed to run 11 GPM each, and 22 with 2 of them. And so you should be able to, the design basis was run 2, keep 1 offline all the time, clean, so that you can clean it, and 2 should keep up with 100% capacity. We're way less than that, but what they've improved is by kind of rotating in a 7-batch cycle as they run 7 batches through, which is kind of the full complement that gets you to an MST sludge solid transfer to DWPF. In that nominal week period, they try to rotate each filter down. So they don't wait till a filter gets really degraded. They kind of take it offline a little earlier, and Steve will talk more about this tomorrow, to try to keep the health higher, and we've seen increased performance because of that. Way back probably 2 years ago, even some of the cleaning streams where they went, we were putting them on the front end of the process and pushing them back through the filters, and now they go a different path out to DWPF that prevents us from fouling those filters further. So that was a big change that we saw. We've done 2 things process-wise to try to see if we get improved filter performance. One is called monosodium titanate reduction, MST reduction, because there's some concern that adds to the solids loading that causes problems. So we've been reducing that, still within the specs that we need for the plant to operate with the DF that it needs, to see if that would improve things. Not so conclusive there, although we're still working that campaign. And then another one is adding a sludge filter aid, if you will, to try to you want the small fines that we believe are plugging those filters to kind of cake on top of the filter and not get down in the pores. So a lot of times you'll put a sludge filter aid in the mix that kind of helps conglomerate those particles, keeps them on the surface and doesn't let them get in the pores. And so they've gone through 2 different campaigns of trying a filter aid to see if it helps. And the most recent one, they're still studying the data, but it looks a little promising, but none of these get us to where we need to go. And that's why the testing that the team did early put us on a path of let's put in longer filters that have more tubes in them to go to 200% capacity of where we are today. And we believe very strongly that that's going to take care of the rest of the problem. So that's been a big thing. The other big thing has been the ones I was describing around DWPF sludge receipt and adjustment tank, trying to get to where that part of the process doesn't shut SWPF down, because you have to be able to catch everything that SWPF is sending you. And so you got to make that process run faster. You got to give yourselves options of being able to burn that material off in multiple vessels. And one I didn't talk about is they're going to, in the spring outage, put in interim lag storage between the 2 facilities to expand it even further. So DWPF is a bunch of single-step processes that can fail. It doesn't have redundancy in the main process, and it's normal for things like that to break, just like our cars break. And you've got to be able to ride out that and let DWPF fix their items and let SWPF keep running. So more lag storage will let DWPF, when they have normal equipment failures, fix them, store that material without shutting SWPF down, and then the speed up stuff at DWPF on the SRAT lets them run faster and catch back up. So those are probably a couple of the big ones that have been helpful, but there's been a lot of other ones too. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Phyllis.
Phyllis Britt, Cab. I was just wondering, as you have focused more on the waste with higher curies, have you had to make any kind of adjustments as extra protection for the workers? I assume that the system is pretty much sealed and so they are protected anyway, but are there things you've had to adjust on that end so that the worker isn't in any danger, extra danger?
Right, so I'll address that in a couple of ways. The actual processing facilities where this material's processed is remote, whether it's in DWPF or SWPF, and it's heavily shielded, and it's within the design specs of that shielding. Probably the challenge is more where we have to do maintenance, where you have the workers have to get closer to the equipment, whether it's in SWPF or DWPF, because you have to take things out and work on them. And so we've had to do a lot more about extended decon times. We use steam, we use acid, we use water, but mainly steam and chemicals to help us decon the process equipment. And so we've had to expand some of that time to let things decon longer before we can have workers approach it. And then ultimately, we manage the dose our workers get. We have not changed any of the parameters of what workers are allowed to get, and we manage within that. And with doing more decon work, we've been able to pretty much do that. The lab probably, I see Melissa nodding her head. Lab may have, and Melissa, have y'all seen increased dose rates? Have we been able to manage that?
Yeah, we have been able to manage that.
I'm sorry, can I get you to come up to the microphone? I just want to get it on the record for the transcription.
Yeah, so we have been able to see some of the increase of the rates. That's why we have in my presentation tomorrow, you'll see pictures of our cells. And what we do is that we spend more time within those shielded cells. We do a lot of preparations with our samples to get them to a rate lower, so when they do come out to where the technicians are actually hands-on working on them, we still maintain the rate. So the increased rate we see in our sealed shells, so our shielded cells. So our folks are not, the rate that they're being exposed of is not being increased. And we do maintain those levels. And we have radiological protection people with us who check those rates constantly every time we take a sample where the technicians are working on hands-on.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Candace?
Candace Cave Cab. So my first question is, can you just tell us who are your client and who is your stakeholder?
Our client is the Department of Energy, and so that's our client. And our stakeholders are South Carolina Department of Environmental Services, EPA, and other interested members of the public like yourselves. Y'all are part of our stakeholders.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that the people who are hearing this for the first time in the room understand what's going on. So my other question, I have a few. How many of the type 3 tanks do you have? You were talking about the new versus the old style. So in this presentation, you're talking about the old style tanks. How many of the new style tanks are there?
I'm trying to think the numbers. At 20?
23.
27? 27. Thanks.
Okay.
I was going to say that, but I wanted to make sure.
Are there currently any FFA milestones connected to those new style tanks?
It just, so the only ones that have an individual by tank are the old style tanks, the 16 that are left, plus the ones that preceded that. The rest of the tanks, the new styles in F and H tank farm, roll up under a common one that close F tank farm at the end of the mission and to close H tank farm. And all of the new style tanks roll up to either that F area one if they're in F area or to the H one at the end of the mission. That also captures the ancillary structures and et cetera. So, but they all roll up to one big one, whether it's F tank farm or H tank farm.
So it's still the 2037 time?
Yeah, in that time frame. I think, I looked at the permit this morning, I think F tank farm was 2036 and I think H was 2039, but our goal is to be done with everything. So F will precede H because we're focused on that first, but our goal is to be done with all of them by 2037.
Okay, all right. So my last one was, I think maybe Joel said this, but when you were talking about the removing of the waste, you treat it, and then you dispose of the waste. What happens to the water that you use to clean it? Do you discharge it back into the environment? What happens to the water after you're done with your process?
So some of the water is actually recycled to use back in the process itself. But I think what you're asking about is the in-stream delivery water. That water is clean.
That
water is clean. That's the water that we're discharging to the environment.
And where's that?
Upper 3 runs.
Yeah, so that water predominantly comes off when you do the evaporation process to concentrate the waste. We get a cleaner stream that comes off the evaporator overheads. That then ultimately goes to the effluent treatment facility where it gets chemically treated to get any chemical contaminants left, and also get some minor radioactive treatment that strips any of the minor leftover that's in that stream, and it's already a very clean stream. And that gets it down to where it meets South Carolina discharge limits and as described.
I actually wanted to show that to you in the video, so.
I know, I figured that. I was like, I knew that was in the video. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Pat?
Pat Kilroy, cab member. Do any of the tanks leak?
Some of the primary tanks do leak into the annuluses, hence the example you saw in tank 10, the material in the annulus, that was from leaking from the primary tank into the annulus. And if you go back to when the tanks were constructed, back in the day, the old days when, like in the 50s, et cetera, in those time frames when they were built, we didn't know what we know today relative to heat relieving, stress relieving of welds that are done, whether it's on the base metal where they've melded plates together or done in the field. And so we have some cracks, stress cracks, corrosion cracks that have been caused because of the fact that we didn't treat welds, heat treat them, stress relieve them back then like we do today. So that's why some of the older style tanks that were built longer ago have had some minor leakage, to very minor leakage to which, like you saw in the picture there, for example.
How much leakage per year today?
Well, what we do is whenever we do develop an active leak site, we manage the tank inventory down to get it below active leak site. Is our general philosophy, is how we manage tank levels. So usually, just due to the nature of it being a highly salt-based type material, the minute the material starts leaking through and gets exposed to the air, you'll usually see it do just like it did in the pictures, where it crystallizes, and a lot of times they're self-sealing. They'll seal their own leaks, and so you don't get very much in the annulus pan. That's why a lot of it's on the wall, very little on the bottom, because it's sealed itself. But then we also bring the level down in the respective tanks that do have it, just to try to help manage the situation better.
Well, let me put it this way. How much of that from the tank farm gets into the soil?
No, they go to the annulus. None goes outside the annulus. It's contained in that secondary annulus you saw.
Okay. What are the tanks made out of?
They're made out of carbon steel. That's why we have a very significant corrosion program. We actually add corrosion inhibitors into those nuclear waste tanks, believe it or not. We put caustic and we put nitrates into those tanks to keep the chemistry right, to try to prevent having corrosion. And then we also do a very extensive inspection of the tank, exterior of the primary tank in the annulus. We put crawlers in with cameras and other NDE type devices so that we can monitor to make sure those walls stay healthy.
All right, when y'all complete a tank, what do y'all cover it?
You're going to love this part. We grout the tank when we're done. And I say that in all jest.
That's it?
So after we clean it and we meet the definition for preliminary cease waste removal, we go into a very extensive sampling campaign that then proves that. And then we isolate those tanks, disconnect them. We isolate all the services to them, and then we do fill them with a special grout to fill up the interior. Then it gets turned over, and ultimately a geological coverage, if you will, is an engineered secondary water shedding type cap that is put on it so that it will shed water eventually off the tanks so it doesn't even get to the tanks.
So it's made out of grout too, right?
That's like clay cap, and you're really getting beyond. It's a compacted clay cap. It meets a lot of the things I think you do in other places when you're trying to shed water away from an area you don't want it to leach through. So, yeah.
Essentially think that you're building a mountain. Mm-hmm. That's in essence what you're doing.
An engineered type mountain,
yes.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, one more thing.
Sure.
What is hill removal?
Yeah, so when we go to remove waste from the waste tank, the first step is, I'll call it getting out the large majority of what's in there. We call that bulk waste removal. And at some point you get to the point you got to then focus on a very small amount of material that's on the bottom. We call that hill removal. It usually involves some additional equipment that's done during that campaign. So we'll go put in some additional mixing devices to help with getting the heel removal done. You have to get bulk waste removal and heel removal done to meet the PCWR definition. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm. That's heel, H-E-E-L, like the heel
yes.
of the...
Mm-hmm. Like the heel on the vessel.
John.
John Thomas, cab. Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
Couple questions. You may have already answered them. The grouting is filling. You're filling it because when we talked about P&R, we found out they're not filling the grout. They're only covering the reactor up to the reactor. So this is full.
Yeah, when we get to operational closure, we fill the tank with grout.
Okay.
Including up into the risers.
Okay. And then on the getting to a higher concentration of curies per batch, that is, I think you had mentioned, is that a part of rotating those filters?
No, the higher curies is that the salt batches that we make up that we targeted, not all tanks are the same. Some have higher curie material, some have less curie material. We've targeted the ones that were the higher curie tanks to make up these first 22 batches that ultimately feed SWPF on the front side. The curie content is not related to the filtration problems we're experiencing at all. That we believe that the cause is related to microfines. It's just in the waste. That's our best theory. Steve may correct me tomorrow when he talks about it, but it's addressing that ultimately we determined we just need more surface area to deal with that.
Okay, so it's actually the concentration in the tank and nothing you're doing.
Yeah, we refer to those as microfines, as in because we have solids, like insoluble solids limit to feed SWPF. There's a limit in what we call waste acceptance criteria, which says you got to be in this box to send something to SWPF to make it run well. It's got chemical constituents. It even has insoluble solids to not be an issue. But these are what we're calling microfines, which is something that doesn't show up in that type analysis. And I'm telling you what we believe theory is, I believe, and I'm looking to Steve to correct me. Yeah. Okay. So, and Steve will go into this probably in more detail tomorrow, but that is what we believe is going on, hence why we've been trying to address it with things like a filter aid, because when you have crossflow filters, and this is a known principle in filtration industry, sometimes you have to add filter aids to help things conglomerate on the top of the filter and not let them get in the pores. That's the filter aid that we've been working on. Sometimes you just got to put in more surface area to get the throughput you want, which is what we're going to do in the spring.
Okay, good. Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Don?
Don Colson. Just want to get a little better understanding of your process. I'm looking at the inside the tank slide here.
Okay.
Now your salt supernate, salt cake, and sludge, they don't lay out like this.
Well, are you talking about the
in an actual tank?
So there's a couple ways. Let me go back to that slide, Mike, so everybody sees it.
There we go.
Yeah. So once again, all tanks are not the same. Sometimes it has to do. So the solids come when we dissolve the materials from the canyon. A lot of the heavy metals, a lot of the metals when they dissolve, they end up forming that sludge-like type material. And so typically there are different tanks where a lot of the campaigns from the canyon when we were dissolving would go to those tanks. So you have some tanks that got a heavy sludge concentration, some have a little bit of sludge mixed in or like a sludge layer at the bottom with salt on top of it. The salt comes from canyon processing. The salt supernate is also a product, and over time we have concentrated that material through the evaporators, and that's what creates the hard salt because we concentrate it so much that it then comes out of solution, and we do that so that we haven't had to build more tanks through the years.
So the salt cake is precipitated out of your salt supernate?
Yes, that's right, by concentrating that material.
Chemically, is that the same as what you have down in the sludge, or is that
No, it's different. It's different. You got a lot of the metal from the hydroxides that are, a lot of the solids are in that, and it's different chemically. The supernate is some of the things that were soluble, and a lot of the heavy stuff, a lot of the activity, hence if you remember, sludge is 10% of the volume, but it's half of the curies because a lot of that material settled out in the sludge, and the little bit that was left in a lot of the supernate is 90% of the volume, but still half of the curies. And then what happens is we've concentrated that supernate down to try to reduce space, then you just concentrate it into salt cake. And now we're dissolving it back to liquid to process.
All right. Now going over to removal enables tank closures, you had a couple of unplanned closures.
Which slide? Oh, that one, okay.
Slide 13.
Okay. Yeah, you're talking about the outages?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you use a critical path management system to try to avoid this and see where we can work around? closures? I know you mentioned you're adding some piping to take care of future needs, but what about the ones you've already seen?
Yeah, so for the outages, just to your point, the way the team manages downtime to try to keep the plants up and running is we try to generally plan for one big planned outage in the spring every year. Sometimes there might be a smaller one in the fall, but generally one in the spring around that. And then as the plants have things fail, they're all binning activities that would take their processing down. They usually have ways that they can operate around a lot of those items for a period of time, and they'll bin their items. The facilities talk heavily to each other, and finally, when there's enough things binned up in each facility, something will happen in one of the plants that requires them to truly, we got to go down, we can't run. And at that point, everybody will go into these unplanned outages where they've been storing up things for weeks, if months, to get ready for those, so that they're, what we definitely avoid, to your kind of critical chain type approach, is we don't want anything that breaks in any plant constantly taking each other down. That's very inefficient. So they do an excellent job of binning those items, holding them, being able to operate around those, and then when the one thing that really forces them down does it, they're ready to take maximum advantage in all the plants so that they all come up healthy when they come back up.
So what keeps you up at night worrying about a bottleneck?
So I would tell you the things that we're doing in the spring outage are the big things that probably keep most of us awake, not awake from a safety perspective, but we're going to fix, I'll call it, a lot of the big things that are left. That's when we improve the filtration at SWPF. We get lag storage increased between DWPF and SWPF so that the strip effluent and the MST sludge solids can be accumulated, because we have to make DWPF, with all these single point failures in their process that are in a canyon, highly radioactive, we're going to have to be able to deal with those and not shut everybody down. So the lag storage helps with that. The running the SRAT faster, like I said, we've already improved it 25%, which is 40 hours off that cycle time, helps. Being able to process that material not only in the SRAT, but in the next vessel called the slurry mix evaporator, that helps us run fast. And then a big effort with the MPC crane, which is what runs over all the canyons. We have one in DWPF, they have one in H Canyon, and when something breaks, they have to go in with a crane to take the piping apart, take it to the remote cells. And right now, because the crane controls and cameras have gotten so old, it's just natural progression, that every time we have to work on something, we get an adder for working on it. And so these control upgrades and camera upgrades in the spring will get rid of that so that we can turn stuff around faster. So those are a lot of the big things in the spring that are going to really improve a lot of these items where you see these unplanned outages. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kim.
Kim Wright, CAB. Thank you both for being here and giving us this presentation today. Other than the risk that you mentioned with this aggressive curie removal that you're using in the operations now, other than the risk you mentioned to personnel and some of the filtration issues that you all are working on now, have you identified any other increased risk with this high curie processing?
So I'm going to answer that a couple of ways. So part of when you manage a big program like liquid waste is that we have an active risk management program. So when we issue our system plan, we issue what we call a risk and opportunity management plan that has a list of things that we think are risks to finishing in 2037, and then opportunities to help us even get there faster. And so we manage those every month. The team is constantly having mitigation strategies against those. And just so you know, when we started 2 years ago, there were 81 risks in that document. We're now down to 71 risks because we've worked items and closed 10 of them roughly. And we're continuing to mitigate the rest of them with management strategies, a lot of which you saw on the optimization climb to 9. That deals with a lot of, I'll call it maybe our 4 biggest risks. A lot of them are addressed by the things you saw on that graph. So that's risk to just the mission finishing where we want it to finish in 2037. It's not risk like to people's safety or things like that. This is just about mission completion. And I did want to go there, and I apologize for jumping back to your question, but part of it, as you've heard me talk about single point failures in DWPF, I don't want you to walk away thinking DWPF has to run or SWPF has to run all the time. In the modeling that we've done to the 2037 completion, we determine the effectiveness of the whole system by looking at is solvent extraction and SWPF up or down, and why is it up or down? That is how we kind of measure performance. Our model says that we have to average 65% availability for solvent extraction across all the years to 2037. That means it has to be running 65% of the time to get to where we want to go. To give you a feel for where we are as we continue to work the optimizations, we are around 48 to 50%. And our target this year, as we've been climbing the 9, is to get to 55% this year before it's done, with a goal of getting to 65% next year once we get past the spring outage. So it's a very deliberate plan that we know what we have to do to get there, and we believe we're on that path. So.
Candace. We want to Phyllis first or Candace? Y'all were talking about it. Phyllis? We're going to do Phyllis.
Phyllis Britt, Cab. I was just wondering, how do you know at this point, sometimes 75 years down the line, which tanks are the highest concentration? How do you determine which tanks you're going to deal with first and what's in them?
Yeah, so a couple answers to that question is we're closing. We're trying to meet, we have a performance assessment, a PA you'll hear us talk about. That's part of our closure plan. And so we're ultimately trying to get all the tank inventories down so that we never, I think the end point is that we wouldn't contribute more than 25 millirem to any person in the public. And I'm talking like as we go into perpetuity when the tank farms are done, which is a very small amount for anybody in the public. So what we do is we have inventories for each of the tanks that we have. We have a system called Waste Characterization System, WCS. It is where we keep all the history of what went in the tank, when it went in the tank, any samples that we've done through the last, since we started up, to the best knowledge we have of what's in that tank, both chemically and radiologically. So it is a pretty good predictor of what's there. And then, of course, in our PA, we know the tanks are in different locations. And so we're trying to get them down. And as far as which ones we tackle first, we know which tanks have the most curies of radioactivity. And so that's why we've targeted those. But you don't, you have different samples until you slurry the tank up. Usually you'll see us rebase on a tank, slight adjustments to WCS right after we slurry the tank up, because that's when you get a truly homogeneous of the tank. But it's been very predictable or within the range of what we'd expect. I'm not sure, did I capture that? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I guess part of my concern is my husband is still partially involved in determining what's in some of those tanks. Okay. And I'm always curious how you figure out, because he mentioned something recently about looking for a report he had written 15 years ago and it no longer exists. No. And so if you don't have that information, that, if somebody wrote a paper on what's in a tank 15 or 20 years ago and you don't have it anymore because you've changed how you record things.
Yeah, I can assure you our WCS system would have the information that would have been output from something like that if the paper was based on sample data or something we knew. And all of that is reflected in the WCS system for the tank inventory, and they can even cite the different things that were part of what made that value up, like the things that they used. So I don't.
So it is somewhere.
I don't think we're missing anything.
We're not missing any documentation.
Good.
Yeah, let me be more specific. We're not missing anything. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Candace Cave Cab. So you explained what you do with the water. Can you tell me what happens to the actual waste?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I know some get stored.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Forever at SRS. What happens to the other waste?
Yeah, so big picture, let's go back to this graph, it may help. The whole goal of the mission is to try to get the highest activity elements into the most expensive waste form in the smallest volume. That's DWPF class. So all of the plants are, in essence, extracting the higher activity level components. That's what SWPF does. It's going to run 100 batches through, I think by the time we're done, every batch is 1 million gallons. It's going to run that through, and it is stripping out cesium and also actinides. So the actinides come out in filtration, so that's strontium, other heavy actinides like that are stripped out there, and then they strip out cesium in solvent extraction, and that's a small stream that comes out, and that goes to DWPF and gets in the glass. The large volume of what comes out of that process is what we call decontaminated salt solution, and it goes to Rodney's plant at Saltstone and gets grouted. So we're trying to get concentrated down those items, put them in the glass, and the other plants are separating different parts of the process. ETF is on the front end of that, which is once again the least contaminated stream of water that we clean up through ETF, as we already talked about. And that's how SWPF and DWPF work. DWPF does have a recycle stream, a water stream that comes back to the tank farms as part of the processing. And Joel talked about it earlier. We beneficially reuse that because we're trying not to put more water in the system. We use that to make up salt batches versus having to do water adds. And even when we're doing some dissolution activity, sometimes we'll use some of that, once again, trying to minimize the water waste that we generate processing. So.
What I really want to know is what happens to it after you get it in the however you want it, in the glass or grouted. So what happens to the glass? Is it staying at SRS?
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
So the question, where it's permanently going to be housed.
Here we go.
We don't know yet.
That's the question, yes.
We don't know yet. Everybody's heard
so
of
we
Yucca
still don't
Mountain.
know what's going to happen?
We don't have a facility yet.
Yeah, so
but the U.S. government is working on that.
So right now it's stored in these buildings, as Joel mentioned earlier. That's the glass waste storage building. They're concrete structures built underground, goes down in tubes. They're shielded and protected, and then has a ventilation structure over the top of it. But the tubes are actually down just below the surface in a concrete vault. And Joel talked about the permanent depository, which they're working.
We're working on that.
Do we know the life expectancy of this building that it's being stored in until we figure out the long-term life of it, I guess?
Yeah, these buildings will definitely safely store these canisters.
Long after we're gone. Long after we're gone. But again, we don't have a place just yet. We are searching.
Once again, the chemical constituents are leached, or they're interlaced in the glass structure that's inside the stainless steel canister, and that canister is welded shut. So the only thing the buildings are exposed to is the radiation dose, which is decaying over time. It's going down further as you get radioactive decay. The other place that waste is stored is all of the decontaminated salt solution comes out of SWPF. It goes to the Saltstone facility, and it gets put in those $33 million gallon SDUs, and it's stored.
That's the low-level waste.
That's the low. That's right.
Yeah. So I was just curious. Joel was correct. I just wanted to know where it's going to be long-term.
Gotcha.
And we still don't know.
Not yet.
Okay. Don, did you have another question?
Yes, Don Colson, CAB. In those glass vitrified waste facilities, they're highly radioactive, physically hot.
There's heat from radioactive decay.
What kind of temperatures do they reach?
It's like 150 watts, something like that. At max is 150 watts
of energy.
So it's not very hot. I got to look up the actual temperature, but it's not very hot at all.
And the design of those buildings is designed to let them cool. Originally, we thought they would need a forced air ventilation because they go down in a tube, but then they're open and there's like an air plenum, if you will. And we've determined that for just dealing with the cooling, we don't need the fans. They can turn them off and they just convectively cool adequately.
Thank you.
Okay. Phyllis?
Back to Candace's question. I was just curious. This is the long-term storage is back to the issue of Yucca Mountain, right? And now they've issued an RFP or something to ask for volunteers?
I'm going to have to look into that. There's a lot going on.
I was just wondering how that was going, because when it was brought up, a lot of us said, and who do you think is going to volunteer to do this?
I don't know.
Joel has no comment on that, Phyllis.
Yeah. I know.
you.
Thank you, Amy.
She knows how quiet I
She's
got.
doing like wine.
Thank you both for your presentation. I appreciate it.
Any other questions from around the table? Seeing none. Gentlemen, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So next up on the agenda, we have board business. So right up under that, it has the word voting. And what it should say is discussion, because today our plan is to discuss the draft recommendation coming out of long-term missions of budget. Tomorrow, if you may be voting on it, if you folks decide to move forward with it. And I just wanted to highlight one of the reasons why we do that. If you notice, if you look at your agenda for today and tomorrow, there's a public comment period immediately after a recommendation discussion, and there's another public comment period right before the voting of the discussion. We're trying to give folks ample opportunity to try and chime in, drive, or at least have some influence on how you're voting and get their input heard, okay? So, with that being said, are we ready to move into board business and discussion on a draft recommendation today? Don't everybody agree at once?
Sure.
Thank you. There we go. Draft recommendation. This came out of long-term missions and budget. Hubert, do you want to give everybody the elevator pitch?
I will give the elevator pitch.
It can be a long elevator if you want. I mean, it's
Yeah. I just want to warn you up front, I will be throwing in a little bit of history, but, I'm reasonable. Pat took us all the way back to the year 143, if I remember correctly. I'm not going back anywhere near that far. You know, of course, that in 2 months we have the landlord transition taking place. We have heard that everything is going well, and I believe that, but we have to think about what happened with this program in the past. The U.S. government's atomic bomb building program really started in 1939. See, I'm a lot closer to the present than Pat is. And over a 6-year period, that obviously succeeded. Then we entered the Cold War. One aspect of the Cold War's bomb building project, including the building of SRS, it was actually intended to save money. I know that sounds crazy, but both the Truman and the Eisenhower administrations wanted to build a powerful nuclear force because that was actually cheaper than trying to maintain huge conventional forces. There was this wonderful saying back in the 1950s, more bang for the buck. So anyway, that was the idea. And at the time, in the 1950s, it worked pretty well. But of course, because of the environmental issues, we have some rather long, substantial expenses going on. We frequently hear about, these excellent projects at SRS and other places for cleanup, but none of this is done for free. This all costs serious money. And how serious money? I was reading a newspaper article about some of the problems at Hanford. Hanford has given us wonderful cover over the years because they've had so many problems that whenever the press goes after a facility, it's usually Hanford. But it's not trivial. For example, one recent estimate for a cleanup at Hanford was $500 billion. And that strikes me as a fairly serious amount of money. What I'm getting to is we need to think about the future. We have the issues that we're dealing with right now, but I think we have a duty to consider, preventing similar things from happening in the future. I'm hoping that what this recommendation will do is to formalize a relationship with the NNSA. I keep trying to do that. Signal that we're keeping the future environmental issues in mind and also keeping them focused on it, have a regular contact with them. And, keep in mind with the landlord change, if you look at the board's letterhead, you'll notice that it doesn't actually say CAB and then under it environmental management. It says Savannah Riverside. We have a responsibility to think about the future of the whole site. So I think I've said enough or too much.
I will note, however, that it does say Environmental Management Site-Specific Advisory Board in the mission statement. Out of due diligence. Okay, questions, comments, concerns from around the table about this draft recommendation, the verbiage, how it's put together, the recommendation section itself, especially the recommendation section itself. Is there anything from the board members? Kim?
Kim Ray, Cap. I've read it, and you did a very wonderful job. You, Bear? The only thing, after reading it, the only thing I would recommend in the recommendation portion on that very last line, where it says, in brief, the CAB on NNSA activities with environmental implications, I would just suggest inserting the word unclassified in front of activities, because clearly if it's classified, they're not going to tell us anything about it.
Okay. How do we feel about that? Are we okay with that?
Well, I'm certainly okay with that. You know, the reason I hadn't really put that in there is they're not going to tell us anything they don't want to tell us. But, you know, I have no problem with it.
So maybe in front of NNSA on that very last line, unclassified. Yeah, right there. Thank you. Anybody ever had a whole bunch of people watch you type before? It's not unsettling at all. Phyllis, you had some thoughts?
I was just curious. I presume that the folks at DOE will let us know if we're stepping on anybody's toes with this. That's all. NNSA, you know, historically, as you all know, when we've been with them until recently, have pretty much said what we do is mostly secret. We can't tell you. So I don't know that they technically have any obligation, but I hope they have a desire.
So the way that this is written, it really doesn't. You're recommending that EM request that NNSA appoint somebody, and that is a very okay thing for you folks to recommend. You can write that.
I figured y'all had already helped word it in a way that doesn't bother anybody. I hope. Thank you.
Questions, comments, concerns from around the table? I mean that genuinely, you know. I know I say that, rattle that off pretty quickly these days, questions, comments, concerns, but if you have some thoughts, now would be a great time to get them out. Kim, did you have anything? No? Okay. Okay. Everybody know how they're leaning towards voting tomorrow? Are we okay to push this forward to the next day, or do we need to hold it back? No, we're going to do it tomorrow. I promise. We will not do it today. I want to make sure that we leave opportunities for comments. Okay? We good? All right, Candace.
All right, so I just wanted to be clear that NNSA does not have an equivalent to CAB.
They do not, no.
Nor are they required to.
No, they are not. Okay. Shade?
For the meeting following, would it be possible to have it
Can you pull that?
For the meeting following this one, for the A&O meeting, would it be possible to have it in the hallway? The temperatures in this room is a bit extreme.
We have a separate meeting room downstairs that we could possibly use, but if we need to, we could use the hallway. We'll be good. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns about the draft? I just want to make sure before we leave that. Are we good? Are we all clear to move on to public comment then? Okay. Checking my sheet. First name up on public comment, Donald Moniak. Sure, we can go to Tom first. If you're ready, Tom. Clements.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Clements, and I'm with a small nonprofit organization that monitors the Savannah River site called SRS Watch. And I have been working on issues related to SRS since the 1970s, hard to believe. So I've seen a lot of CAB members come and go. I've attended a lot of these meetings. I appreciate your service, and I've made a lot of comments at them. I have 4 things I want to mention. First, you've heard the date 2037 for tank closure. I would suggest you lock that date in your mind and raise it every time they talk about the tanks. Because the date for closure of the tanks and the cessation of operation of H Canyon, it's constantly moved into the future. So I'm hoping that this date is going to be firm. They've held to it for a year and a half now. So I would encourage you, anytime that high-level waste is mentioned, if you ask if the 2037 date is going to be held to. On this recommendation that you just discussed, I think it is quite, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, so I'm going to say something about it. I think it's quite important that NNSA do brief you on their activities as related to environmental implications, particularly from pit production, which has transuranic waste, and for plutonium disposition, which is transuranic waste, slated to go to the waste isolation pilot plant. And there are other things. And you've just possibly added that word unclassified. Well, the pit production program is a classified program. The waste coming from it, in my opinion, is not classified. I think you've just tied your hands if you put that word in there. NNSA is not going to talk about classified matters anyway. But if a classified program has environmental implications, the environmental implications, some of which are already covered in environmental impact statements, should be talked about. I think you should remove that word. Otherwise, you've really constricted what NNSA is going to have to tell you. So my comment on that. So I want to make sure, and I'm going to submit this for the record, that you're aware that the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, which is an independent board of the federal government to deal with high-level waste disposal, including spent nuclear fuel, and also the high-level waste that's coming from Defense Waste Processing Facility, they're going to meet in North Augusta at a hotel up by the other bridge up there on August 29th from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'm going to submit, if you haven't seen it, which some of you probably had, the news release from July 22nd about what they're going to cover, which includes DOE spent nuclear fuel, siting of an interim storage facility for commercial nuclear fuel, and they're going to talk about the accelerated basin de-inventory program. I will probably attend and make a comment. So I'm going to submit that. The other thing I want to submit in conclusion is that you may have seen this as well. The Energy Communities Alliance, which is governments around DOE sites, has provided a DOE-funded grant to the SRS Community Reuse Organization. I tried to get a copy of the grant from DOE, who claims that this is going to be done with all openness and transparency. They would not give me a copy of the grant that the group here is going to be dealing with on the consent-based siting of our interim spent fuel storage facility. That's commercial spent fuel. Commercial spent fuel, of course, is not in your purview. Nothing to do with that. The storage of it, reprocessing of it, nothing. But I'm afraid, I don't know why a local group is advocating that commercial spent nuclear fuel potentially come here to Savannah River Site. As you have just heard, all that high-level waste is from reprocessing. And this organization, the Community Reuse Organization, has supported the reprocessing, which is separation of plutonium for reuse as fuel, and a massive amount of high-level nuclear waste as a byproduct. We do not need any more high-level nuclear waste stored in tanks at Savannah River Site or anywhere in the state of South Carolina. You've already seen how complex getting the stuff out of tanks is and disposing of it. And to Ms. Cave, there's no place for this stuff to go. Under U.S. law, high-level nuclear waste is defined as the DOE vitrified high-level waste and commercial spent nuclear fuel. It's supposed to go to an underground repository. That does not exist. So those buildings that were pointed out is basically the interim high-level waste repository for Savannah River Site until a underground facility is chosen, which I know DOE is working on now. But I just want to leave you with a thought about what the Community Reuse Organization is up to. Supposedly talking to stakeholders. I'm engaged with what's called the conservation community in South Carolina. All the public interest groups working on environmental issues. South Carolina Wildlife Federation, Coastal Conservation League, Sierra Club, Conservation Voters. And I don't think that the community reuse organization is going to talk to these key stakeholders, which they, in my organization, SRS Watch. If they do not, the report they produce is going to be highly suspect. And unfortunately, I don't think they talked to the right stakeholders in the past. So this time, they really need to do that. But you may have a role if they're also looking for a backdoor way to reprocessing of spent nuclear fuel and more high-level waste, which DOE would have to end up dealing with, unfortunately. And if we need more plutonium, why is DOE now wanting to put 40 metric tons of plutonium in the waste isolation pilot plant? The reprocessing of spent nuclear fuel makes no sense from environmental cost or nuclear non-proliferation perspectives, but it's always hanging out there near the Savannah River site. So keep your ears open when you hear reprocessing. It's a bad idea, as that last presentation just demonstrated. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom. Don, are you ready? Thanks, Tom.
That's just the news article in that news release I mentioned.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is this, you can hear it? Okay, my name is Don Moniak. I am an Aiken County resident, and you really do need a podium here so that people can set things down. Future meetings, right?
Perhaps.
Just a suggestion. So anyway, I'd like to talk about a few things, but first of all, I'll just say that I write about SRS. I contribute to an online media source called Aiken Chronicles at aikenchronicles.com. Most recently wrote about the payment in lieu of taxes situation in which Department of Energy has been paying the same payment in lieu of taxes to Barnwell, Aiken, and Allendale counties since 2009. It has not gone up. And back in May, about the fact that at a meeting at the end of April with the Nuclear Advisory Council of South Carolina, Department of Energy could not answer the question, when is all the plutonium going to be sent out of SRS? Can't answer it and should not be expected to answer it because the variables are too much. Sure, I'll just sit down. So anyway, I'd like to talk about operations. The question was asked about what kind of risks there are. And one thing I think this cab should be hearing a little bit more is about, you heard about the fuel assembly that fell, but there's other occurrence reports that happen. It's in the reporting system. And there was one that was recently happened in the Defense Waste Processing Plant in which there was a lubricant that had momentary ignition. The report said it was quickly self-extinguished as the volume was minimal. They called it a flash, but they didn't call it a fire. The Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board wrote, the fire burned for approximately 6 seconds until the operator turned off the air, providing the lubricant motive force, and the fire went out. The team then repositioned the apparatus and continued with the evolution without notifying anyone of the fire. Nobody was notified of the fire for a full day. And the reason I bring this up is because when somebody starts talking about going 100 miles an hour and greatly increasing production, the risk of accidents does increase because production can take precedence over safety. It has before in the nuclear weapons complex, and it could again. Whether it does in this situation depends, but it can happen. It happened at Pantex, it happened at Oak Ridge, it happened at Savannah Riverside, it's happened at all of them in the past. So it's something to keep in mind. There was a statement at the beginning of all this about being curious. And I just want to comment that you saw today that when DOE, EPA, and DHEC all made their presentations, it was all oral, they didn't have anything that anybody could read, and there was almost no questions, except for about solar, which has nothing to do with environmental management and should have been ruled out of order when it all started. If the NNSA is outside the jurisdiction of EM, and so is the Forest Service, the Cold War history, and solar. panels at SRS. But as far as being curious, you saw people had better questions to ask when they had something in front of them they could read, when they had something up there. So I believe DOE in their presentation should have something written down to hand out to people, and there may be more and better questions. And then leading into my final point from there, in terms of outreach and information dissemination, what I believe needs to happen with this cab is, first of all, agendas should be published further ahead of time so people actually know this is happening. Secondly, these presentations should be published online at least 3 days before they're given, because we all know that, if you don't know, the Department of Energy approves everything that the contractors say. They give them their news releases. News releases have to be approved 7 days ahead of time. Presentations probably have to be approved 3 to 7 days ahead of time. That's in the contract. So there's no reason why these presentations can't be can't be made available ahead of time so that people can be more ready with questions, so that average citizens can ask questions, and so that the people doing the presentations will have questions in hand a little more ahead of time and they can answer them more appropriately. That's how I'd like to finish with what I'm saying. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wanted to make a public comment but did not have the opportunity to sign up?
Was there any questions? Anybody curious?
All right. All right, so moving on. So we have a full day of work ahead of us tomorrow. A lot of presentations that we've got to get through. I'm going to ask everybody to start coming back in around 8:30 tomorrow, and we'll start working down our agenda. Any questions, comments, concerns from around the table before we recess for the day? Phyllis?
I was just going to say that the way we set up the program this year, if you want to attend the committee meetings next month, that's when we have an opportunity to, after we've thought about it and reviewed the programs that were presented here, we have the opportunity to ask more questions, and those people are made available to us. So you're invited to come to the Waste Management Committee August 20th, right?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Anything else from around the table? All right, Phyllis, you want to recess this for the day?
Yes, there is a meeting of the A&O committee just following this. I will not gavel us out because we're not out, we're just recessed. Thank you, see you tomorrow morning at, did you say 8:30?
Yeah, sounds good.
Just checking. Thanks.